And the US has imposed a blockade on Iranian ports in the Strait of Hormuz. And according to international law, blockades are considered an act of war. Therefore, in a way, the US has started a new act of war on Iran, even as the two countries are observing that 2-week ceasefire. The move by the US president has been widely criticized, with China being among the latest to condemn the blockade. Listen to the statement.
At
a time when the relevant parties have already reached a temporary ceasefire arrangement, the US escalation of military deployment and its targeted blockade action will only exacerbate contradictions, heighten tensions, undermine the already fragile ceasefire situation, and further jeopardize the safety of passage through the strait. This is dangerous and irresponsible behavior.
China has called what's been happening. In fact, China has called Trump's behavior dangerous and irresponsible. And the American vice president has also equated the blockade to economic terrorism, quote unquote. He says that Iran engaged in economic terrorism first. And now the US is abiding by the same principle.
They basically threatened any ship that's moving through the Straits of Hormuz. Well, as the President of the United States showed, two can play at that game. And if the Iranians are going to try to engage in economic terrorism, we're going to abide by a simple principle that no Iranian ships are getting out either. We know that's a big deal to them. We know that applies additional economic leverage.
The US says it is blockading Iran's entire coastline. It is reportedly doing this with 15 warships, including the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier. But reports say that ships are still managing to move through the strait. The Chinese-linked tanker Rich Starry was reportedly the first vessel to pass the strait after the blockade came into force. The US had sanctioned the ship back in 2023 for helping Iran evade sanctions, reportedly. Despite this, Rich Starry managed to bypass the blockade. According to marine trackers, its last port of call is Al Hamriya in the UAE. In fact, the US has maintained that it is only blocking traffic to and from Iranian ports. However, reports indicate that other ships, even those coming from Iranian ports, have started to cross the Hormuz Strait. One of them is one which reportedly set sail from Iran's Bushehr, reportedly. Another is the Liberia flagged, which set off from Iran's port, reportedly. It seems that ships have already started challenging the American blockade in a way. The question still is, will the US use force to stop them? And how would Iran and other countries respond to that if that happens? John Rosamando is the president of Viking Research Associates. He's also a geostrategist and expert on U.S. national security, joining us from Washington, D.C. Thanks very much for being here. I have to begin by asking you, there are a lot of these unanswered questions right now as to what happens here onwards. But looking at the way things stand right now, with the report suggesting that tankers have already been moving through the strait, with China's reactions coming in regarding Trump's actions, calling them dangerous. What do you make of the way things stand right now, especially between the US and China?
Well, I would call China's reaction hypocritical. It vetoed a measure that would have called Iran to task for its violation of international law with its blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. So, we've had two times in UN history, Korea in 1950 and against Saddam Hussein in 1991, where the UN has given an authorization of force. So the President of the United States has decided to enact a low-cost effort against Iran to choke off its source of funding.
But at the same time, reports suggesting that tankers are moving through the strait. So isn't that a failure of Trump's plan right now?
Well, I think that, that's something that the administration needs to look at is how is it going to enforce these blockade restrictions, and what are they going to do? Are they going to start sending special forces aboard to capture these vessels like we did a few months back against Venezuela? I think these are things that really need to be looked at. And what happens, say, if the Chinese decide to send warships to challenge the blockade? I mean, we only have 15 ships out there in an area that's a couple hundred miles across.
What do you think is Trump's thinking behind this move, and what is he hoping to achieve? Because there are a lot of these possibilities out there, like you're pointing out.
Well, I think that the president's trying to do an alternative to boots on the ground against the islands in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, one of the reports I received was that they were about ready to do so, but then the Emiratis, had cold feet because of Iranian targeting of their oil infrastructure. So the GCC states are under siege. And, the United States is trying to do what it can. But, like you said in your intro, the Saudis are concerned about the Houthis opening another front at the Bab el-Mandab Strait between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much for joining us with those perspectives for now.
Thank you.